Yeah, thank you so much, Dean Weinstein. Yeah, I can do some transition. I'm going to do some transition. Thank you so much, Dean Weinstein, and also thank you so much for everyone attending and joining our conversation on AI governance on the first HKS Symposium on AI policy. I'm Fabian. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School studying Masters in Public Policy together with Moritz, and we are very happy to introduce our first panel, the race to artificial general intelligence, who will win and at what cost. And we are joined by an outstanding group of leaders working in AI and AGI in one form or another, from perspectives from government, industry, and civil society. And it's also my pleasure to introduce those speakers to you. But first, please, we welcome you on stage. Cyrus, Greg, James, and Christina. Okay, we're just getting set up. Cyrus, right here, is funding transformative and trustworthy AI as a venture partner at Lionheart Ventures, and is also working on the interplay of technical and governing AI safety as the founder of AI Safety Connect. And he is also an MPA at Harvard Kennedy School. Then we are joined by Christina. Christina is a Harvard JD MBA candidate researching AI agent governance at the Berkman Klein Center, and has previously worked at the head of Scale's AI Security and Policy Research Lab, and as a senior policy advisor at the US AI Safety Institute. We are also joined by Greg Allen. He is a senior advisor at the Wadhwani AI Center, researching AI policy, diplomacy, geopolitics, and national security. Greg played a major role in shaping US AI policy and is a leading expert and analyst in US-China AI competition. And finally, we'll have James Ryan. He is a chief strategy officer at Keep AI Safe, a foundation protecting children from AI-related harm. He's also a Harvard Innovation Lab member and a Harvard College alum. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Fabian, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
I'm Moritz, I'm MPP1 here, and I have the pleasure of moderating this panel. The race to AGI, why do we choose that focus? As we heard, the labs are under intense scrutiny and pressure right now. We see OpenAI adding ads. We see Anthropic in a conflict with the Pentagon. At the same time, as our dean pointed out, the commentary ranges from utopia to dystopia. And some commentators even question whether AGI is the right framework or whether that is all a big distraction. So we wanted to bring senior leaders from industry, from academia, from the think tank world together to discuss where are we in that race to AGI and what are its policy implications. And to kind of kick us off and situate where everyone here is on stage, I want to start us off with 3 very quick questions. So I'd ask our panelists to be very brief on this. And give us a short answer to these 3 questions. Number 1, what is your timeline for AGI defined as a system that is roughly capable of all human cognitive tasks? So what is your timeline for this? Number 2, what is the biggest risk you see in that race? And number 3, from which actor do you expect the biggest contribution in that race? So an example answer would be, I see AGI coming in 2035. I see the biggest risk as Harvard students cheating on their exams. And I believe that industry will regulate itself and be the biggest contributor here. Greg, maybe why don't you start us off with your 3 quick answers to these questions?
Well, first, thank you for having me here. It's a delight to be back at Harvard. In the intros, I was the only person who didn't have my relationship to Harvard acknowledged. So I did graduate from here in 2017. Second, I would just like to say I fought backstage to have more than a one-word answer, and he staunchly said that no, you only get a one-word answer. So here we go. 15 years. I would say inappropriate deployment of AI before it's ready or in a bad use case, and the government.
All right, right here. I would say 2030. And the biggest risk is cognitive outsourcing, changing the way humans think and behave and interact with each other, and changing our societies. And in the short term, the number one influence, I think, in reining it in will come from insurance companies.
I would say if you look at a singular economic task, the next 2 years, based on OpenAI's GDP eval or Anthropic's economic index, but if that's economic tasks at scale without humans in the loop, I would say anywhere between 3 to 7. In terms of which player is going to play an outsized influence, I would say it's probably industry, but not the big labs. A new ecosystem of third-party industry that helps mediate between the government and the big tech companies. And what was the third question?
Who's the biggest actor, right? So that's what you already mentioned, the kind of third parties, and the biggest risk you see.
Oh, and the biggest risk is that it's deployed in a way that we can't enforce governance. And that applies to both near-term and more future-oriented harms.
Thank you for having me. Just to start, I'd like to respectfully push back against what Dean has been saying. This is not a normal technology, right? This is not a tool. We're creating an intelligence, so just to be clear, but happy to discuss that. I'm a short timeline, like Demis Hassabis, or even Sam Altman, Dario Almode, all are 3 to 5 years, and I tend to respect this timeline. The biggest risk of the AI race is the race dynamic itself. It's extremely dangerous to frame it like that, and I'm strongly pushing back against that. And yeah, I think the innovators, entrepreneurs are the one driving this so far, and that's going to keep going for the next 3 to 5 years, I believe.
Okay, thank you for all of you to keeping it short, and we see basically quite some even agreement on relatively short timelines. Cyrus, I want to maybe start it off with you then. Can you go a bit deeper in explaining how you arrive at that timeline, and maybe what is the maybe biggest risk if your timeline is wrong?
So in 2015, we started something called the Future Society here. We incubated at Kennedy School. It's now a successful think tank. In 2015, we were talking about governance of AI, and everybody was looking at us with big, wide eyes. What are you talking about? And it was really, really difficult. So this big part, educating policymakers and linking the language of technologies to policymakers. Going back to your question, which was?
And like, what is you explained why you arrived at that timeline. What if you're wrong? What if actually we have way more time?
So, okay, so now the governance of AI is something real because there was the GPT wake-up moment, right? GPT, was it 3.5, where everybody had access to it and started looking at it. And since then, if you look at companies doing evaluations such as Meter or Apollo, you see increase of possibility and speed of thinking and lengths of thinking, right, that are reaching, if you follow the curve, right, it's not only following what Ray Kurzweil has been saying for a little while, and it just turned out that he's pretty much right, and he was spot on since the beginning. I'm just following this exponential curve where we have this acceleration coming 3 to 5 years. Makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you. Going over to you, Jem. You mentioned that kind of the cognitive risks are your biggest worry here. You still have also quite short timelines though for when we have AGI. Can you explain maybe that tension? If AGI really arrives in like 2030, 2035, should we be worrying about these cognitive risks, or are there other risks to worry about?
Yeah, well, I think we're already seeing the effects of what cognitive offloading does, to the brain. And there have been some studies published already that, as you offload more and more cognition to external tools, your ability to perform those tasks atrophies. Human beings have done this throughout history. We offloaded arithmetic to calculators. You can go even further back. We offloaded memory to written language. And each time we got a really good trade-off. We didn't have to have an oral history anymore. We could share knowledge across generations, or we didn't have to worry about the mundane calculation of arithmetic. We could focus on bigger math problems. And we see this happen with GPS freeing us up from navigation. But AI, and I'll echo Cyrus and push back slightly against the dean, AI is a very different tool in that it allows you to offload almost everything the brain does all at once. And so what's going to happen to human beings? If anyone who has children today, they're the first AI native generation, and they're going to be adults in 10 to 15 years. So what is that society going to look like when people have grown up pretty much offloading everything that the brain has evolved to do?
Yes, I see. Christine, I want to bring you in on this. I think it's briefly mentioned in the beginning. You also helped actually set up an AI Safety Institute here in the US. I was a bit surprised actually when you mentioned the biggest actor, or where you see the biggest change coming from, as like third-party operators, and not maybe an AI institute. Could you maybe explain, why do you believe third-party operators bring this push, and why maybe not an AI institute or, the government?
Definitely. And to be clear, I think that it is definitely a cooperative future. And safety institutes, and particularly the one in the US that I played a small role in helping start, have an incredible mission and incredible people who are still doing that work. And I think the most effective work that can come from safety institutes or centers for standards and innovation are helping unify standards, helping fund research, and helping bring the different actors together. But in my experience, where a lot of the technical tooling to actually evaluate how AI operates and what the risks are come from a lot of the labs, but also more and more companies that are helping mediate between the labs and the government. Because I think increasingly people are starting to realize that the labs can't really grade their own homework. It's not effective to have only safety evaluations occur within big tech companies, but you also, it's a bit infeasible, especially across the world, to try to recreate that technical capacity within every single government.
And when you, during your time there, you kind of, I guess, you had to triage a bit, right? These different types of risks that an AI institute can focus on. Risks mentioned by James, the cognitive decline, keeping our children safe, versus something you mentioned yourself, deploying ungovernable, kind of more systemic risks. From your experience, how do you triage these? Where should we kind of place our chips here? Is it more child safety, the more kind of right now risks, or should we govern more these systemic risks?
I hope you don't have to choose, and I think that a lot of the technical solutions are quite connected. So if you focus on national security and public safety, that might be looking more at base model, red teaming, testing, and evaluation. But I think we're increasingly starting to see that whether it's near-term child safety or more future biosecurity, a lot of that doesn't come at the base model, but it's more downstream application, what happens in this specific deployment, and what are the relevant characteristics that we need to evaluate. And that is a universal approach, whether we're thinking near or long-term.
Yes, thank you. Greg, I want to bring you into here as well. Given your work, I think your timeline carries an maybe exceptional weight with 2035. So if you could explain that and just kind of to bring that in, some commentators, Ajay Kotra, one AI safety researcher, kind of warns of this, that at some point we'll see AI models being used to train AI models, and there's a risk of this kind of acceleration. Could currently OpenAI and Anthropic claim at least that their current models are already trained in that way. They're basically self-improving. So basically explain a bit your 2035 estimates, where does it come from? And are we already in that phase of kind of self-improvement of models?
Sure. So a few things. I think a useful historical comparison here is autonomous driving. So I remember while I was at HKS, in fact, in 2016, the CEO of Ford Motor Company said that by the year 2021, autonomous driving would be such a solved problem that you could get in your car, fall asleep, and arrive at your destination wherever that may be, within drivable distance. He was actually a laggard in the industry in terms of what he was predicting and how fast it might happen. Of course, you can guess who the most bullish was. It was Elon Musk, who every year between 2016 and this year has said it will be next year. So that's 10 predictions in a row that it's going to be next year, and yet we are not, in fact, there. And I think the best rebuttal to Elon Musk actually comes from somebody who used to work for him, Andrej Karpathy. And what he has said is that self-driving cars is a march of nines. And what he means by 9 is the difference between 90% reliable, 99% reliable, 99.9% reliable, 99.99% reliable. And he says adding every additional 9 of reliability is as hard as the previous one. So it's as hard to go from 90% reliable to 99% reliable. It's as hard in terms of engineering task difficulty to go from 99.999% reliable to 99.9999 reliable. And just remember, we're talking about what percentage of the time does it crash. So how many times do you want, how many nines do you want? You want a lot, right? You would like it to crash fewer than 1 out of every 100,000 times, right? You'd like it to crash effectively never, would be your ideal. And I think you can draw that analogy to where we are in terms of artificial intelligence compared to the human being. We see astonishing progress, and the progress is legitimately astonishing. I mean, just take a moment to reflect back on your first time touching ChatGPT. If you were an early adopter, that would have been November of 2022. It's come a long way. It's way, way better. But what I'm saying is that the tasks ahead of us are also quite hard. And so while I expect incredible progress, it's weird to be seen as the pessimist by saying that we're going to create something as smart as a human being in every meaningful way 15 years from now. That was something that would get you committed to an insane asylum 25 years ago, right? To say that that's where we are. But today, that makes me a pessimist by comparison to the industry and the predictions that you see out there from the CEOs. But I expect to continue seeing progress. I expect to continue seeing accelerating progress. But the accelerating progress point, I think, can very much be overblown. How long was it after we invented computers that we started designing computer chips on computers? Recursive self-improvement is a phenomenon of almost every technology, certainly every general purpose technology. And so when I see it in AI, I think it's absolutely real, but I think it's a continuation of that trend.
I see. Christine, I saw you nodding when I mentioned this self-improvement. Anything you want to add to that explanation of Greg?
I definitely agree with Greg that as you try to get more precise, that's when it gets harder and harder. And that's why there's a distinction between doing any economic task and doing an economic task without a human in a loop at scale, because AI fails in weird, unpredictable ways, even if it doesn't fail that often. In terms of AI helping to improve other AI, I think it is a little bit distinct from other technologies, and that it's not just helping with the more mechanical side of generating training data to then use to train the next model or helping optimize outputs, but we're actually seeing it be quite effective in helping hypothesize new algorithmic efficiencies and recreate academic papers and contribute to R&D in a way that is more of a thought partner in a weird way and less of a tool that's purely mechanical.
Yeah, if you may add, yeah.
So also on recursive self-improvement, as far as like 2-3 years ago, for Eric Schmidt, it was a big red line, right? We shouldn't let AI systems improve themselves autonomously without us understanding the code behind and what they're putting in. We've passed that red line, right? So that's one we passed. We passed the Turing test. Turing test is done and dusted. It's behind us, right? And nobody's talking about it. We crossed the red line on lethal autonomous weapon systems laws, right? So right now, if you go to Ukraine on the battlefield, both sides are using autonomous agents with autonomous kill decision in the battlefield without having a human behind. For security reasons, it's difficult to have a clear line because they're being jammed. So therefore, these systems are being used. That was a red line too that we're crossing. So we keep on crossing these red lines without society talking about it, without even the Kennedy School talking about it. And I think it's time to pause and reflect on what we want the system to become, and having at least, even when you listen to the leaders of the biggest labs, going back to Davos, listening to Dario, talking to Demis, Azabis, they're not asking for a moratorium, they're asking to slow down, right? Again, this dynamic of a race is extremely dangerous, between the labs, but also between geostrategic adversaries. This can only hurt us. So slowing down is a good idea. Understanding these red lines is also a good idea. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good transition. That's something I wanted to ask you about, actually. We see Anthropic in their latest responsible scaling policy update actually taking out some safety commitments that they made and basically saying, well, we are still planning on slowing down if the others do too. So basically in a game theoretic setting here. Still, you said in the first question that you believe innovators and industry will play a driving role here. So my question would be, how can we trust these companies actually mean that? Or is this just a pose to kind of buy them more sometime?
That's a great question. Right now, we're trusting companies in the US and in China to have what is called voluntary commitments, right? They all say we are, implementing AI system, or we understand how our system work, etc. But we have nothing to verify that their commitments have been reached, right? So there is no trust mechanism that exists right now, and that's something that is much needed. Whether it's between US labs, between Chinese labs, or between US and Chinese labs. Having a trusted third party that can implement this verification mechanism for this voluntary commitment is something that is crucial at this stage. And there is hope and optimism. When I was discussing with Gregor before the talk, I'm just back from China, I'm talking to Chinese labs, they're okay having a trusted third party doing that. And what is a trusted third party for the Chinese? It's probably Singapore. It's probably the Singapore AC, right? The Singapore AI Safety Institute that is trusted by the Chinese, but also trusted by us, by the US, right? So why not leverage, countries such as Singapore, such as the UAE, such as China, to implement this verification mechanism between labs? That's going to help the labs, but also going to help society in general.
Yeah, Jim, do you think we can trust them on their commitments? Voluntary commitments.
I think in a capitalist system, private companies, publicly traded companies, corporations have to pursue profit. And it's unreasonable of us to expect that they will sacrifice profit for anything unless it's a requirement. If it's a regulation, sure. Factories don't dump their effluent into rivers, not because they think it's a bad thing to do, but because it's regulated. And if it weren't regulated and their competitors were doing it, they would have to do it too, because they would have a cost disadvantage if they didn't. So I think that applies to AI companies, and that's why I mentioned insurance companies as my preferred sort of de facto regulator. Anybody who has been involved in the sales cycle for software as a service products to large enterprises, the first question you're going to get is, are you SOC 2 compatible? Are you SOC 2 compliant? Because the CISO will not implement any software that hasn't passed these standards that show that they're safe, that they are secure, that they're not going to leak information. And these standards have been developed not by governments, but by industry. And I think there is a space for the same thing to happen with AI, and that's already happening. There's some startups already getting involved with underwriting of AI products. And when insurance companies say, we're not going to give you cyber coverage unless your AI agents that you're deploying in your enterprise meet these standards that the industry has agreed on, that's what's going to become I think the quickest route to regulation, because I think the frontier companies, their biggest source of revenue is going to be, not selling to governments, but selling to large enterprises. And they will listen. If that's a requirement, they will have to follow it.
Yeah, understood. So we see we can maybe trust them on this. We either need third parties, we maybe need insurance companies. Well, there are some in Silicon Valley, as also our dean mentioned, that say, well, that's just a regulatory capture. We should actually follow the administration's approach, let it rip, and not go with this. I think you all know there are some VCs that push very hard for this. Some share my same haircuts. You might know who I'm talking about here. Greg, is it regulatory capture? Do you see what you answer to VCs that say, well, all this talk about new regulations, that's just regulatory capture. We need to let the industry be set free.
I struggle to hide my contempt for this argument. And I say this knowing some of the principles involved. So when Dario Amodei, for example, the CEO of Anthropic, I first met him, I want to say in maybe 2018, maybe 2019, but I'd known of his work going back all the way to 2015 when I read a paper of his called Concrete Problems in AI Safety, which still reads pretty well, actually. And that, I think he published in 2014, when he was no one, right? When he was a nobody researcher at Google Brain. What did he spend his spare time thinking about? It was AI safety. There was no hope of regulatory capture. There was no grand master plan. It was what he cared about long before he was anywhere remotely close to the executive suite. So as a hypothesis for the motivations of these individuals, I think it's obvious nonsense. I think it's also not clear that it's even indicative of their behavior. I mean, you see many of the companies, and I'm not going to name names, but let's just say not Anthropic in this instance, where the public messaging has been, can't wait for regulation. And then the private messaging has been in a vague sense, right? We are pro-regulation in a vague sense. And then the private messaging is, but not that proposal, but not that proposal, but not that proposal, but not that proposal, right? So anytime the proposal is specific, they're against it, but still in the vague sense, they're pro-regulation. So if regulatory capture was this attractive, viable strategy, they would probably actually pursue it as opposed to opposing regulation in practice, which is what almost all the companies have done. And then to go back to your more fundamental question of can we trust the companies? Well, I just said something nice about Dario, so let's separate the questions of what do I expect him to do. I expect him to prioritize safety. Does that mean I would trust him, which is to say I don't need any other mechanisms to know what he's up to? No, I don't. And let me give you what I think is exhibits A, B, and C for anybody who's taking these issues seriously. It is what's going on at Meta. So if you haven't been reading the reporting coming out of Reuters, they've gotten an extraordinary trove of leaked documents from inside Meta, in which Meta's own internal estimates are that 1/3 of all fraud and scams in America go through Meta's platforms. And then they did an internal analysis of how much, 10% of all their advertising revenue on Meta is from enabling frauds and scams. Their own internal analysis here, again. They assessed their own criminal liability in this and decided that the maximum fine they could expect was about $1 billion, but they were making billions of dollars in profit every quarter, and so it was more profitable to just continue facilitating the scams. And that is not even the most damning piece of evidence. The most damning piece of evidence is that they had a fraud prevention team, and their budget was, we recognize that 10% of our revenue comes from fraud, and we want you to get rid of all this bad fraud. But if you affect revenue by more than 0.1%, you're out, right? So literally, you're not allowed to fix the fraud, is how they did this. And they had a separate fraud prevention team that succeeded in reducing fraud, specifically fraud sourced from China, and the team was disbanded and all their fixes were gotten rid of, right? So, look, all of my analysis depends upon these leaked documents being genuine. I'm assuming they are genuine. If they are genuine, then it turns out that devious scoundrels can amass power in Silicon Valley. And whatever policy we want to pursue, it needs to take into account this fact, that devious scoundrels can, in fact, amass great power over technology companies.
So I take that as a summary of no, we should not trust.
You see why I was so opposed to your brief answer demands earlier. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think something that relates to this is that right, we not only see VC firms and these companies now kind of speaking out about it, they actually put money into political races. So there are kind of two big super PACs. One called Leading the Future, mainly funded by Mark Andreessen, other investors that put money into races and basically back pro-industry politicians. And then we have an opposing super PAC, Public First Action, funded, among others, by Anthropic, that's basically back policy makers on the other side of this. So giving this right back to you, Greg, given this kind of fraud moment and the money that's coming in, how has AI become now kind of fully partisan issue? And if so, is that something we can walk back in any way?
I would say it has become more partisan, unambiguously. I would say AI was one of the most bipartisan issues if you go back certainly to the first Trump administration, and even most of the Biden administration, not all of the Biden administration. It had become reasonably partisan by the end. But even now, the fault lines are not always partisan. They're not always where you would expect. For example, the Trump administration itself is certainly opposed to regulation, not in all cases and not to all extents. Their own policy framework is calling for certain degrees of regulation. But if you were to contrast that approach with, for example, the proposal that was just introduced by Senator Marsha Blackburn, a Republican senator of Tennessee, there's some really harsh mechanisms in that policy to control corporate behavior. Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican of Missouri, others in both the House and Senate do actually come down in favor of some pretty strict regulation. On the left, it's more consistent, but you still have a wide variance of degrees. You've got Senator Bernie Sanders, who is looking to literally ban the construction of data centers, which is one way to tackle the problem. And then you have others who are more focused on the safety aspects or the child safety aspects of the story. So there's a great deal of diversity of views. They don't neatly fall on partisan lines, but it is certainly the case that the policy positions have become more sorted among partisan lines.
Yeah. Cyrus, you are also part of AI Safety Connect. How do you, and your organization, how do you kind of navigate this more bipartisan nature of the issue? How can we prevent this from becoming a fully partisan issue?
So there's a major cognitive dissonance here, cognitive dissonance, that regulation stifles innovation, right? So when you look at any industry, literally any industry, that is like pretty much all industries are regulated, sometimes over-regulated, but it doesn't mean that, you know, the car industry, you feel pretty safe right now when you buy a car. You know, the airplane industry is pretty safe. You're happy flying a plane because you don't think it's going to crash, right? Because you have all these safety standards that are put in place, all the regulation that are in place. Now we have the most consequential technology that mankind has ever created. You know, it's not only me saying that, it's many top AI experts saying that, and we don't want to regulate it. So this is, it doesn't make sense at all to me. So that's the first cognitive dissonance. The second one is, when did safety and security become woke? Why isn't it a national security issue that we want to make sure that these systems that the frontier labs are creating are safe for us, you know, as far as human, as safe as far as society, and we don't want to address the two main points, you know, that safety is looking at, which is the problem of alignment, making sure that these systems are indeed do what you intend them to do, and the problem of control. How can you control a system that is cognitively, you know, 10 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times superior than yours? Your cognitive abilities doesn't make sense. And so this should be, you know, forefront of all the national security discussions. You know, AI safety should be something that we should embrace, you know, as far as national security leaders are concerned. And a lot of them are looking at it. And, you know, what gives me hope, it's also sometimes, you know, a bipartisan issue, not enough. But right now with this administration, it's something that is woke, that we should not regulate, and that is not a national security issue. So that doesn't make sense to me at all.
Jim, your kind of main risk of cognitive kind of outsourcing and protecting children, that's actually one part the Trump administration has embraced. So how are you and your Keep AI Safe Foundation, how are you kind of navigating this partisan landscape?
Well, you make a good point, and that's when it comes to children's safety, I think we have very strong bipartisan support. And when you talk about this issue, you get very few people who are opposed. And then you have to get into the actual, you know, implementation details. And, you know, we've seen, you know, Washington State just, I don't know if it's signed yet, but they passed, I think, the first AI Safety Act that's specifically aimed at keeping kids safe. You know, as with anything political, comes down to the details. But from a broader picture, I think, you know, a lot of the policies and regulations we can put in place to protect children protect broader society as well. And anytime you're building, you know, resilience into the system, so I would say that regulation is one side of the issue, but another area where I think you can get bipartisan support is resilience to the anticipated effects. So, you know, neither party will benefit by mass unemployment, right? So if we start to see, and we are already seeing, you know, college graduates, I think between 20 and 25 have an unemployment rate almost 10% right now. That's the tip of the iceberg. And as AI replaces more and more jobs, you might not see these big headline layoffs, but you'll see just hiring reduced. The unemployment rate ticks up, and we're looking at, you know, a workforce unemployment rate of 10% plus. Nobody benefits from that. So can we now, while it's still early in the process, get bipartisan cooperation to build resilience into the system to prepare for a society that might have to deal with that challenge? And there's other challenges like that where building the resilience into society, which is a role that really only government can take on, is a bipartisan supportable issue.
Yes, I think you're fully right when it comes to child safety, right? Who would be against that in that way of form? And I think that's a difficulty for people advocating for more maybe systemic risks. So, Christina, I want to hear your take on this, right? In the child safety case, we unfortunately have seen, right, we have seen minors trying to attempt suicide based on their interaction. So there has been kind of this very, outcry, and there has been news coverage. Same thing for kind of, Greg, what you mentioned, self-driving cars, right? We have then seen some accidents that kind of create media attention, and that can be channeled into policy change. You mentioned earlier, right, your kind of main risk is what if we deploy these kind of ungovernmental loads of AI? That's a very kind of abstract risk. So how do you communicate that risk to policymakers? And do we need some kind of catastrophe or small event that actually communicates that to the population and kind of rallies people behind regulatory efforts?
I think the key here is that we don't need to think about creating some new universal safety framework. I did a lot of work previously trying to coordinate across different governments and come up with one definition of safety or one definition of harm that we could all agree on to then start to hold model developers accountable. And it became clear very early on that would never work because there is no one definition of safety or one law that everyone agrees AI should follow across the world. And that's actually quite beneficial. We have diversity in society for a reason. And to come up with a solution to the systemic problem, it's not that, we need this governance framework that applies to the labs, and then everyone will realize that this is a big issue. We have laws and regulations that exist right now, and most of the use cases of AI apply to the exact same things that humans do. So whether it's helping with a financial lending decision or interacting with a child in the same way that they might use a website 10 years ago, all of these things have an existing body of law that people have used for generations. And so I don't think it's that we need to communicate to policymakers that they need new AI regulation. It's that we need to communicate to both policymakers and insurance companies and technical companies that we need to build evaluations and governance metrics so that we can understand how AI is following the law that exists, and then make sure that it's effective to keep AI in line.
Yes, Greg, I wanted to go to you anyways, please.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say one brief thing on the innovation and regulation debate. It is obviously true that regulation can stifle entrepreneurship, can stifle economic growth, can stifle innovation. Regulation can definitely do that. But the sources of that are often misidentified. So, for example, I was recently in India for the AI Impact Summit. Yeah, it was the AI Impact Summit. And oftentimes when I was meeting with Indian government officials, they asked, what kind of AI regulatory regime do we need to promote our domestic AI industry? And I was like, look, your regulatory regime is terrible, to be perfectly honest, and it would make me really hesitant to start a business here. And it has nothing to do with AI at all, right? In India, if you hire more than 300 employees, you have to get permission from the government to fire anyone forever, for the rest of your company's history, right? Those are the kinds of regulations that stifle entrepreneurship. Those are the kinds of regulations that stifle innovation. When I was meeting with this group a year previously at the AI Action Summit in Paris, we met with this group of French entrepreneurs. And I was asking them, do regulations stifle your ability to start a business here? They're like, yes, oh my God, you would not believe how hard it is to hire, how hard it is to get real estate, all the other aspects of the business ecosystem. In almost all cases, those are the regulations that hurt the most to economic growth. When you talk about new additional AI regulations, yeah, it's not fun. It's not like they're looking forward to it. But if you're assuming that that is the locus of the problem, I disagree.
And to the point of communicating this to policymakers, you're in touch with policymakers all the time. What's your approach here? Do you think there's actually a need for kind of some new news coverage to get the people behind this, or how can we break this impasse a bit on the policy side?
Sure. So I'll say this because I know we have students in the audience, and this is my sort of overarching philosophy of policy advice, whether it's on AI or whether it's anything else. But having been a policymaker in the government and now being at a think tank, let me just say that the mean, median, and mode in terms of impact and usefulness of a think tank report is none. That's by far the most common outcome, is irrelevant and unloved by all. And if you want to do better than that, it's not easy. And I would say one of the key hallmarks is you have to imagine, who is this document going to be useful to, and why on earth would anybody care what I think about it? So let me give an example here. If you're a student here at Harvard Kennedy School, you're probably interested, let's just say hypothetically, in the US-China relationship. The odds that you're going to figure it out, pretty low. And even if you do, the odds that anybody cares, also incredibly low, because you're just a measly student. And so what you have to do is you have to find issues where number one, the proof of your work will speak for itself. And number two, you actually know who is the audience for your policy recommendations, and you put it in front of them. Like, whenever I see a think tank report that says the United States federal government should, I'm like, well, that can go right in the trash, right? But when I see something that says, the Undersecretary of X, or better yet, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of X should do Y, right? Should change this policy language to that policy language. You want recommendations that are specific enough that somebody could actually say yes to them. That there's a human being out there who has the authority, who has the mandate, who has the relevance to say yes to your policy proposal. Because that person might very well be ignored and unloved in their own job. If you show up with AI workforce policy recommendations that actually address like the phone book thick, set of existing workforce policy recommendations, everybody wants to write about, oh my gosh, here's how US should approach China, right? Nobody wants to write about that. If you're the person who writes about that, you might actually be useful to them. And they might be willing to overlook the fact that you're a measly student and read your report if it's useful to them. And so you do that, and you be useful enough times, and people trust you to make recommendations on the bigger issues.
Thank you, Craig. So to all policy students here, show some love to the middle managers of the policy world.
Yes.
I really like that.
And
unfortunately...
I'd just like to add, don't ignore the 501c3s out there. Because policy doesn't, in democratic societies, policy doesn't happen without public support. And the public needs to be aware of these issues. And there's a lot of us out there scrappily working to raise the awareness of the public of these issues. And we're chronically underfunded, so any help that we can get in that area is great. But going back to your issue, it's not just making a report in a vacuum. And the more and more incidents pile up that get the public concerned about this, and the more we're able to get the word out, the more likely these policies are to pass.
Yes, thank you so much. We are fortunately running out of time already, but as with the Kennedy School, we do want to give the audience as well time to ask a question to this panel. So if there's someone that wants to direct a question here, see a hand going up right there. Exactly.
Hello, Marley. I'm a public sector middle manager. I think there is a body of work that we can rely on, but what are the missing regulatory instruments? So if I think in history, the invention of a company meant that liabilities were assigned. In the case of mass printing, again, libel law. Here we have a problem that we don't know who to assign liability to. That'll be a problem for insurance companies too. Jurisdiction and liability, how can we deal with those two problems?
Does someone want to take that question? Yeah.
Sure. I think, sort of piggybacking off of Christina's comment earlier, we do have existing laws that regulate a lot of these actions. When an AI takes it, it's generally no different. If that AI was created by a company, the company is, there's a little bit of unsettled law there, but we're gradually seeing trial courts settle it one case at a time, and we had the big case against Meta that was just recently settled in favor of the plaintiff. So I suspect, given public sentiment, and given that most of the cases that are actually being brought to trial are very, very extreme cases of damage, up to and including death, we're going to start to see precedents on the books, and that's how law gets built, unless we pass something that's specific to this. I think that existing tort law is going to be pretty effective.
And I would also quickly add that, yeah, tort law is definitely the vaguest right now, but we're seeing more and more companies being held liable for the AI they're deploying. So Eightfold AI, which is an AI hiring company in California, is facing a class action lawsuit. Air Canada had one for a contract that was made through a chatbot. And so increasingly, it's becoming clear that AI is being treated just as any other tool that a company might deploy, and that's because a lot of the threat that comes up from AI doesn't happen always at the base model, but takes into account environmental characteristics that come more downstream. So whether it's a prompt injection or someone misusing a tool or a company not aligning it correctly to laws and policies, that's all things that happen in already regulated, to Jim's point, sectors.
So I just wanted to add one thing. So the most interesting case that I'm waiting for to come to trial is a company that's created a product using an API connection to one of the LLMs gets sued and loses, and then sues the LLM maker. Where does that liability lie? Where's the borderline there? I'd love to see that case come to trial.
Very, very briefly, I'll just say the low-hanging fruit of government intervention is transparency, right? What you don't want is companies who do studies that find out they're doing all this kind of evil and bad stuff to then be like, everybody who's involved in collecting the studies is fired, right? You want this information to be collected. You want it to be transmitted to the government or some other sort of third party. I think that's an obvious win and the low-hanging fruit that still has yet to be picked.
Yes. Thank you to all of you. Unfortunately, we are out of time as of now. However, I want to advertise there is also a networking session right after our last panel. I think the majority of the speakers will be there as well, giving you the chance to ask a question in person. Thank you so much for coming here, taking the time. We also have a quick thank you for you.
Thank you so much.